Vietnam in the late 1500s to the early 1900s was split between two noble families, the Trins who ruled the north and the Nguyen's who commanded the south. Vietnam had been split between the north and the south for centuries, which eventually leads to major conflicts in this area. The nobles sought to expand their territory because more land leads to more resources, and more resources equals more money, and more money equals more power. But what about the peasants? What do they get in this situation? How did clashes between the noble families in the later Le period affect the lives of the Vietnamese commoners? What you need to understand about Vietnam during this time is that it was under a feudal system, meaning that the population was in a hierarchy with the king and the lords at the top and the peasants at the bottom providing the foundation for everyone above them. The conflict between the two noble families during Vietnam's dynastic period severely disenfranchised the commoners, inspired effective results, and changed the actions of the laborers. As the two families expanded, all of the land they acquired was awarded to the upper-class members only. A rivalry between the two families sparked when there wasn't enough land to go around. To pay for the war, both families heavily taxed their people. Nobles and scholars were exempt from taxes, so the burden fell onto the commoners. Along with this, the peasants were the one fighting the war to begin with. The fighting led to a neglect of the extensive network of irrigation systems that the peasants used for farming. And as the irrigation systems fell into despair, flooding and famine followed. Commoners could not afford the taxes because the famine caused nearly a quarter of the peasant population to starve to death. The fighting between the Nguyen's and the Trins household hurt the well-being of the commoners. Similar to the French Revolution, the rulers imposed large taxes on the lower classes, which they could not afford. And that led to a great deal of the commoners not having the means to even feed themselves and their families. Due to these outrageous taxes, the peasants revolted. At first, the revolts only consisted of landless commoners who put forward demands of land reform, reasonable taxes, and stood by the slogan, "Rice for all." The nobles, being pompous donkeys, ignored their requests. These calls were supported by peasants in the north and the south in a time where commonalities between the two regions were scarce. However, during the 1770s, the results started gaining traction, led by the Tai Sung brothers. They were all Nguyen's, but they were called the Tai Sung brothers because that was the name of their village. When the brothers joined, the rebellion movement started to control territory, and in those areas, nobles were stripped of their riches. Their land and belongings were distributed to the poor. The conflict left the peasants with no other choice than to fight for some basic rights. The start of the revolution alone changed the lives of the peasants because they were able to unite with one another and gain some power over their former leaders. Overall, the fighting made the common people change the way they presented themselves. The internal power struggles in Vietnam left the country vulnerable to the Europeans who came in swarms to Christianize the Vietnamese population. The French especially were able to convert so many commoners because they were discontented about how Vietnam was falling apart. Christianity seemed appealing because it was different from the Confucianism beliefs that their leaders were following. It was their way to protest against the government. On the other hand, every time a new family took control, peasants would change their names in hope of gaining loyalty points with the new emperor. Fun fact, the Nguyen family became the most powerful between the two, and they were the last dynasty to control Vietnam. Since no other family followed them, the common people did not change their last name. So many people were left with the last name Nguyen, and that's why it's such a popular last name, and most of the people who have it aren't related to each other. In conclusion, the fighting between the Trinh and the Nguyen family during the later Le period kept the peasants in a lower class through taxation and making their lives unlivable. And that caused the commoners to stand up and fight for their rights, and change the way the peasants acted, either to please their leaders or to disrespect them.